Hi, I'm Mary Caton, a sports writer with the Windsor Star, and we're here today with George Drew, a local endurance runner who's going to be running the Boston Marathon next Monday and also ran the Boston last year when the event was the target of a terrorist attack. 2 bombs went off, 3 people were killed, and hundreds injured. And George, I understand that near the finish line, you actually picked out one of the bombing suspects, caught your eyes. Can you take us through that a bit?
Yeah, what happened was the day prior, my wife and I had been going to a couple of the stores, and we went into Marathon Sports, and we went into a place called Sugar Heaven, which is for kids. My kids love candy, so we went in, and so we shopped, left, race is finishing, and as I was coming down the finish line, I thought, what a great concept for a store to do in Windsor. So as I was heading into that part of the finish corral, I looked over, and it just so happened there was this guy standing right in front of Marathon Sport. It was just momentarily, and it seemed like everybody else was away from him, and he was not like everybody's clapping, so he kind of stood out because everybody's clapping and cheering people on. And I looked at him, and he just stood there, blank stare at the grandstands. I just found that really odd, and I picked it up. And there's this thing when you're a runner, I don't know if people understand this, but time seems to slow down a bit when you run. So it was probably a split second, but it seemed like a long time, and I just looked at him as I was running, and then finished, had no clue about the bombing. Then what ended up happening after the fact, when we found out about the bombing, I told my wife, I go, I saw this guy who looked really out of place at the finish line. So my daughter had her charcoal, her art set, so I sketched a caricature of what I thought was somebody who may have been. And then the next day they released a photo of the Saudi. Looked nothing like my drawing, so I figured I just saw a guy, and
Yeah.
And it wasn't until they released the surveillance videos that I looked at my picture, and I looked at my wife, and I said, oh my goodness, I think it might have been. So there's a whole process that took place. I met with federal marshals, and they debriefed me, and then I had to meet with RCMP here in Windsor. They were really nice. I mean, it may not have been, but they made me redraw the picture or the drawing and submit it, and I don't know what they wanted me to do that for, but I did. And may have been him, may not have been him, but it was just odd that he was there at that time. My first photo didn't, or my first drawing didn't match. The second drawing was spot on.
Wow.
So it was creepy.
Yeah.
It really was.
And you mentioned, I mean, it wasn't until you were back at the hotel and through the TV coverage you really got a sense of what had just happened. And then I understand there was an agonizing disconnect with your family, your wife, and your 2 young daughters. Can you tell us what was going on there?
I'll try. When I was done the race, I was texting my wife. I got my bag. It took some time to get my bag in the recovery area. And so I had texted her, and I said, where are you? I'm waiting for you, or what are we going to do? And she was coming up, and I forget the name of the road. It's just north of Boylston, which is where the both bombings took place. She said, I'm coming up, I'll be heading towards Boylston. So what happened was my eldest daughter was bugging her go back to Sugar Heaven to get more candy for her friends back in Windsor, because that's the way my daughter is, right? And my wife said, no. Dad said, don't go out where the crowds are. There's too many people. He's going to be meeting us back towards where he's at. We're going to take the alley, because there's no way to get around. You have to go around the long way. And she didn't want to go. She doesn't like crowds, neither do I. And here I am in a 40,000 runner marathon. Oh. But anyway, so she went down the alley, and when she got even with Marathon Sports loading doors, that's when the first bomb went off. Right?
Wow.
And she won the argument, not my eldest. So yeah, so they continued down the alley, then the second bombing happened, and that one ricocheted more down because of the percussion came down the alley, and it was a lot more impact than the first one was. So they started to run and head, I guess that would be east. And I was texting her, then all the phones went dead. So I got back to my hotel. I got up into the room, and my mother-in-law was crying, not my Christine, and I'm like, what's going on? I still didn't know. Like, even getting in the hotel, I still didn't have a clue. I saw a lady with shrapnel wounds, and her kneecap was blown off. I thought she'd just fallen really hard. I'm like, wow. So I got back into the room, and I looked on TV, and it was very surreal because we got reporters sitting there talking, and they're down below our hotel, and there's smoke coming up on TV, and there's smoke coming up from our window because we were right at the finish line. And then they reported that a mother of 2 had her leg blown off and one of the children had been killed. They didn't say whether it was a boy or a girl. I'm just thinking, here I am, my wife's out there, you know,
Can't reach her. Oh.
Phones aren't working, so I had to go back out to find her. The federal marshals weren't going to let me out. I'm not going to get into detail what I said to them, but they let me go.
Yeah.
And as I was walking towards the door, my wife and the kids were coming up the escalator. They had gotten in through a back way because they had put the hotels on lockdown.
Right.
And we reunited, and I saw some of the other Windsor runners, and they were all accounted for. So.
Wow.
Ugh.
Now, I mean, no one would begrudge you if you never step foot in Boston again. Why are you going back?
Well, my youngest daughter said to me, Dad, will we ever go back to Boston so the bad men know we're not afraid?
Wow.
My 7-year-old, right? So I said, okay, well, I guess I'm going to have to try and go back. And it was a heck of a process because Boston, unlike a lot of other marathons, there's lottery marathons, there's marathons like Detroit where you can get in as long as it hasn't filled up. But with Boston, you have to qualify.
Right. And
I didn't requalify in Boston, so 20 days later, I ran Mississauga, and I requalified.
Wow.
Okay. Then we found out that they were going to be changing the qualifying time because they were adding more runners to accommodate the thousands of runners, which I fully understand, who didn't get to finish. But in a sense, us runners who did finish, we didn't get our closure either. We were allowed to wear our medals. We weren't allowed to really wear our, like, you just felt bad and you didn't want to advertise that you had finished. So I ended up registering for the Amherstburg Marathon, which is out in, I think it's held in September. Chris Yazinski puts it on. He does a great job. And so I ran that and I requalified with a 3:19. And then I wanted to make darn sure I requalified. I ran Detroit again, and I got a 3:16.
Wow, what a busy season.
So it was always these 20-minute or 20-day jumps to try and regroup myself for the next marathon. So I did, and I'm going.
Wow.
For everybody. I mean, it's for my family, for the people in Boston that got injured. That's why I'm doing it.
Well, it's very courageous of you. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.